Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. And once more, dear friends, let us go into the breach. And we are very pleased and honored today to be joined by AJ Buddy Fortunato. He is the publisher of the Italian Tribune newspaper, the nation's premier Italian-American weekly publication since 1931. He has long been a dynamic, dedicated member of the metropolitan area's large Italian-American community and a champion for Italian heritage and culture in the United States. Buddy began his career in finance with Merrill Lynch in New York City. He was also elected later on to the New Jersey State Assembly in 1977, and he served for 8 years. Buddy purchased the Italian Tribune in 1999, at which time he assumed the position of publisher. Today, the Italian Tribune is the largest Italian-American paper in the United States and is now on the verge of yet another expansion, which will directly link the paper and its readers with the Republic of Italy. Buddy Fortunato, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure.
All right. So, Buddy, we got a chance to meet one another because of this sad incident down in the city of Newark, where the mayor, Ross Baraka, he ordered not only the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue in downtown Newark, a statue which was also gifted to the city by Italian Americans, but also the one that stood in front of St. Francis Xavier Church on Bloomfield Avenue in Newark. And that's the one we're talking about today. So first of all, Buddy, who created that statue? Who was responsible for that statue?
My father-in-law, Asa Lagna, who was at that time the publisher of the Italian Tribune, was responsible for the erection of that statue. And it brought great pride to the North Ward of Newark. Joe, you remember the parades, Columbus parades we used to have, and the irony is the fact that the first black mayor, Ken Gibson, who was a tremendous individual, a gentleman, was present when my father erected and announced the statue at the first wreath laying, and he never missed a parade, never missed a wreath laying. He was there all the time, and he had a very close relationship with the Italian-American community and always participated. And then came Sharp James, and my father-in-law enjoyed that same relationship. So the irony is that here we have a mayor who really doesn't give the community any respect at all. And I tried to take this statue down himself. He had his people pulling a midnight raid, and we had been alerted to it, and we prevented that from happening. Otherwise, the statue would have been destroyed, and like so many other statues that have been coming down in recent weeks.
Yeah, we see that. We're seeing that all over the TV. And Buddy, just if you don't mind, taking down the statue, though, I mean, you just went into the history of it, because if I remember correctly, growing up, there were a lot of African Americans that attended the Columbus Day Parade. It wasn't just a symbol of Italian American pride; it was a symbol of Newark pride. I remember
absolutely
all recognizable figures in the North Ward, even for a young kid like me. I knew who Donald Payne was when I was a kid. I knew who Earl Harris was. I knew who Ken Gibson was. I knew later on who Sharp James was. In other words, we never saw it as something that excluded the African American community, because there were many African Americans at the parade. It started down on Prospect Avenue, so and then came all the way up to, by Biazzi's restaurant by the church. So, but Joe, I know that you wanted to also.
Yeah, Buddy, I mean, this is a subject that's very dear to both our families' hearts. My father grew up on 11th Street in Newark, and he was an all-city basketball player at Barringer. and they're very proud of that particular community. In fact, he was baptized in St. Francis Xavier Church. And to hear that the statue came down saddened him. What I'd like to do is kind of set a timeline. I'm sure that there were events that led up to this. You kind of alluded to it when you were just discussing with Joe what happened. Basically, I want to set the record straight for our listeners. What were some of the events that led up to this? I'm sure you had suspicions. This has gone on not just on Bloomfield Avenue, but across Essex County. We've seen incidents in Nutley. Could you just give us a little timeline so our listeners can get a clear understanding what actually took place?
I had a feeling that at some point, and I had this feeling about, I think I mentioned to Joe around 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't remember, but it was when the attacks on Columbus really began to heat up, and I called the Newark councilman and asked him if I could take the statue down from the park. Even though we owned the statue, it was on Newark land, and I did not want to create an issue and have them wake up one morning and see, an empty area there. So I gave them the respect, Joe, which we did not get in return. But I asked if we could have the statue because at that time I had a location for it, a prominent location. And he came back to me a few days later and said, no, everybody wants it. They want to keep it. We're going to clean up the park and no problems at all. Nobody wants to touch it or damage it or anything like that. Fine. Fast forward to about a month ago. And I begin to get hear rumblings from friends that I should keep an eye on the statue. So I go to Newark councilman, I go to the county executive, other people in the county, and they went to the mayor. And the mayor assured them that there would be nothing, no problem with the statue. Don't worry about a thing. Well, the night before it came down, during that day, I get a phone call from a friend of mine who says, pretty good source just reached out for me and indicated that he's going to be part of a crew to take that statue down. I said, geez, everybody I go to is assuring me that there's not going to be a problem. I will do it again. So the day before, I go through that same routine. My friend who made that call to me also begins to make phone calls. He gives me a call late in the day, around dinner time. He said, my information is pretty good, that there's going to be a raid on the statue. They're going to come up to take it down. So I was able to get friends of mine, a security detail, guys who are in security, to guard the statue. At 2:00 in the morning, a contingent from the city pulls up in front of the statue on Bloomfield Avenue. The first thing out of their mouth was, what are you guys doing here? How'd you find out about this? Nobody was supposed to know about this. We have an order from the city of Newark, from the mayor, to take this statue down. Well, to make a long story short, the security detail was able to prevent that from happening. And they had called me, and I said to them, we'll take it down tomorrow, the next day. And that's what we did, because I didn't want anything to happen to that statue. We had very little to stand on because it was on city land. And since we were the owners, we could take it and we could relocate it. And right now, as I've indicated, Chris is resting, and he'll be making an appearance again.
Well,
I love the fact that you call him Chris, buddy.
Right, Chris.
That makes me very happy.
Joe, we've become close. Over the years, we've become close.
I love it.
Yep.
I love it. I want to comment on an open letter that you wrote to Governor Murphy, who recently stated that Columbus does not represent today's values. What values? This is what I would say, Mr. Murphy. What values? These are not the values that I learned at my kitchen table. I'm very interested in your response to the governor.
Well, I thought his comments were not those of a leader, not those of a governor. I thought that they were rather ignorant and inane. He, as you indicated, said that Columbus, in his opinion, didn't represent the values, principles of today. He also condoned the statues, the Christopher Columbus statues, to come down in the various municipalities. And at that time, when he made that statement, he was referring to Camden, I believe. So I just felt that, he deserved, he issued a shot across the bow of the Italian-American community, and I felt he deserved 2 shots across his bow. And I put my letter to him on the front page of the paper. And I cannot tell you the response that we have received. I got a phone call today from readers in Chicago, commenting on it, saying, go get them, good for you. We wish we had somebody talking on behalf of us out here. So I responded to him, Joe, and I referred to the principles, the symbols that evidently he thought were okay. And I asked him about Camden and Chicago and Baltimore and Detroit and Newark and East Orange and Irvington. What about what are the good symbols there? Is there a good education system? Do you allow your family to shop in those areas, in the commercial areas? What's so good about those areas? I have not heard from him. I know he gets the paper. The governor's office in Trenton has been getting this paper since 1968, when my father-in-law bought the paper. So I know they saw it, but we haven't heard from him. I asked him. Go ahead.
I have a sneaking suspicion, buddy. Forgive me, that you're not going to hear from the beloved governor.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he is that kind of leader. I had said to him, my initial paragraph, if I remember, Joe, I said that I had recently looked up the most important dates in the history of the world. And I said, you know what, Governor, to my surprise, 1492 was listed among one of the most important dates. And you know what that signified? It signified that Columbus discovered the New World. And I took it from there.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said in that letter, did you take the time to talk to the Italian American community? Did you take the time to find out the significance of Christopher Columbus to the Italian American community? I said, I know that answer. The answer is no.
Right.
And I said, you bowed to the symbols of hate. And if I remember correctly, I said something about respect, Governor, is a two-way street. What street are you on? I said, I think it's called Italian discrimination.
Well, it does sound like that, buddy. And another thing too is obviously we're talking about the pandering leaders that we have in New Jersey. Ross Baraka was particularly insulting because when he came out with a statement that said, this taking down the statue, talk about the one downtown, taking down the statue is not meant as an insult to Italian Americans. It's just we're taking down a symbol of brutality and oppression and enslavement. And I was like, well, what do you think? We're all morons? No, you don't realize that I'm insulted by that? Because by saying that, you're saying that I honor the legacy and achievements of a man who was brutal, an oppressor, and an enslaver. So I guess he didn't put that together. But I did want to ask you, buddy, I'm going to give a little shout out to one of my Seton Hall prep paisans, Sal Pierulli, who's a resident of West Orange. He started a petition. Let's talk about another pandering politician, buddy. And thank you, by the way, for the update on all things Newark and Christopher Columbus. So Sal started a petition to keep the statue of Columbus standing in that town, in West Orange. And it's funny enough, Sal's Italian teacher at Seton Hall Prep, Anthony Lupica, who was my Italian teacher at Seton Hall Prep, he said he called Columbus a prideful symbol of this Italian American community. So, however, the mayor of West Orange, Robert Parisi, who obviously is a panderer, he's made a decision that the statue is to be removed. So what did Parisi, because I'm interested, because it's one thing when you get something from Ross Baraka where you get something from Governor Murphy, but this is an Italian American mayor of a town that's got a lot of Italian Americans in it, okay? What did he say about the statue being removed? Like and what was your response to that in the Italian Tribune?
Well, that was another column I dedicated, very critical of him, questioning his respect for his grandparents, his parents, and his heritage. And I was very critical of the approach he took, because he did it by making statements that were rather sarcastic. It's coming down anyway, no matter what you do, it's coming down, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he did not give the Italian American community respect. And that's what it comes down to. That's what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. If the ethnic groups that make up the United States of America do not respect one another, then how are we going to live together in peace? How's that going to happen?
Buddy, we just were on Newsmax last week, and I talked about how pluralism is gone. What you're seeing now is iconoclasm. If you look at history, when statues have been removed, and this is not the first time this has happened throughout history, free speech is next. The next thing, and we're already seeing it. We're seeing it in the university. We're seeing it in the corporation. This is happening. You can't even express your values. You're labeled immediately as a hater, as a bigot. You're right. To have an intelligent conversation. And I am so glad and proud that you're naming names. like this mayor of West Orange, Robert Parisi, because it is time to put your name on the paper. There is no more time to stand on the fence. And you, sir, are standing up. And this is what we need. I want to know what our politicians have to say. Murphy has made it clear. Mr. Parisi has made it clear. I also want to know what Bill Pascrell has to say. He's my congressman. I'm sure you know him very well. What's his response? And where does
Well, you know, it's funny. It's funny you said that, Joe, because he is the object of my column in this week's Italian Tribune. He owed the Italian American community a response for the slandering of Christopher Columbus. He owed the Italian community a response for these raids, these attacks physically on the statues that were coming down in the state of New Jersey. The least he could have done was make comment on other jurisdictions. He didn't even do that. And he is not only a congressman, he holds the chairmanship of the Italian American delegation in Congress, in the United States Congress.
What a joke.
He is supposed to be the leader of the Italian American Congress representatives dealing with Italian American issues. Well, I would think that this issue should be right at the top of the list today. He hasn't said a word. So
Well,
I took him to task.
I would imagine, buddy, that you know, if he's talking about like all the Italian Americans in Congress, I'm sure Steve Scalise and people like him, you know, want some answers on this. But when you're dealing with the leadership of the Congress or the House of Representatives right now, when you're dealing with people like an Italian American like Nancy Pelosi or an Italian American like Cicilline, the guy from Rhode Island, and people like that, they're not gonna care one bit about Italian Americans. And it's a shame.
You're absolutely right. They make me want to throw up. They make me want to throw up. Pelosi, as the speaker, is supposed to be the #1 Italian, and she sits by with her mouth shut, playing politics, not even making reference to Baltimore, what took place in Baltimore. Well, her father was the mayor of Baltimore.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yep. And he's got to be flip-flopping in his grave too. There are a lot of people flip-flopping around, I got to tell you.
Well, I'm sure Christopher Columbus is one of them. And speaking of Columbus,
well, I compared in the letter in my column this week. You will see my reference to Congressman Peter Rodino, and it was Peter Rodino with Congressman Frank Annunzio from Chicago, who were responsible for Christopher Columbus becoming a national holiday. That pen that was used by President Johnson to sign that document is in the office of the Italian Tribune. And Rodino took great pride and great satisfaction to see that through. And Pascrell obviously does not hold that same the same symbols that Rodino had grown up with in his role as the chairman of that committee. So I know Bill Pascrell a long time. I'm sorry?
No, go ahead, buddy. I'm sorry.
I know Bill Pascrell a long time, and he represented his district competently in the past. But here was an opportunity where he had to stand up and didn't. And let me tell you a story. Because of that silence and not seeing any statement from Pascrell for the last 2 months on what was going on, I called his office and I asked if he had made a statement, because I probably missed it. There's got to be a statement. Could you send it to me? And the response was, we don't have one, but we'll send one over to you. We'll make one now. I told him not to. I said, you just answered my question.
Yeah.
For the silence.
Lots of silence, buddy.
Well, I say we have a statement to make, and the statement is we will vote you out.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'm already looking into that, okay? Because I don't have much information right now. There is an African American conservative. I believe he's from Patterson. I'm going to do a little bit more research and find out where his office is. And he's running against Pascrell. He made the ballot. He's running against Pascrell. We need to shake things up. But let's move on a little bit, buddy. We're talking about, obviously, revisionist history here. We're talking about revisionist history being taught in the public schools. We're talking about not honest. See, we're honest. We don't revere, we don't look at Columbus or anybody else. I don't care if you're talking about whether it's Martin Luther King or Columbus. I don't care, any historical figure. Nobody's looking at them as saints. Everybody's got their sins, okay? But this push towards revisionism is showing us that there's a major problem in the education system. So you indicated that you were going to put together a group whose goal it is to set the historical record straight on Columbus as that subject is taught in the public schools. So
I have that meeting on Thursday.
Okay, and how would you go about, briefly, trying to get not just the truth of Columbus, but I know we're focused on that now. How do you get, let's say, prevent the revisionist history from being taught and have honest history being taught? And do you consider this to be what you're going to do with this group? Do you consider this to be an uphill battle because you're dealing with the education establishment?
Oh, absolutely. It's an uphill battle for a couple of different reasons. The teachers union is extremely close to the Democratic Party, and they're one of the spokes in that Democratic wheel. There's no doubt about that. And they get the votes that they want. They get the benefits. You've got that liberal bent philosophy that is anti-Columbus, and that's what the students, kids, people in high school, grammar school kids have been taught. Recently, I learned, and maybe you guys knew this, but I did not know this, but Christopher Columbus became a Franciscan monk. I knew that he was a very religious guy, and he was acting not only on behalf of Spain, but he was also acting on behalf of the church with the exploration. But he became a Franciscan monk, and many people feel that he did that because of what a few of his men did against his orders when he left to go back to Spain. Mm-hmm. But Christopher Columbus was a hero in every regard. He was a hero. He took back after the first voyage. He took 6 of the natives back, and I got this from his diary. He took 6 back to Spain. First thing he did was get them baptized. You know what that prevented anybody doing to those new immigrants to Spain? It kept them from becoming slaves. Being baptized kept them from becoming slaves. that it was the first thing Columbus did. So all of this baloney about Columbus being a slave trader, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Buddy,
Nothing
the
could be
sad
further
thing
from the
is the
truth.
truth, the mob wants its pound of flesh. I've seen so
Oh,
many
yeah.
with regard to Juniper Sierra in California, with regard to statues of St. Louis. They're not interested in history. They're not interested in dialogue. They're not interested. There is an agenda being put forth by the Democrats. This is absolutely, positively not even, speculation. And they're not interested in dialogue. They're only interested in their pound of flesh. And it's a disgrace. It is an absolute and utter disgrace. It is, in fact, racism. As you said, racism is a two-way street. I'm married to an African-American woman, and so is Joe. We love everybody, everybody. And racism works two ways. At the minimum, if you have a problem with a statue or an icon, take it to the legislature. As you said, do it like a gentleman. Petition the government. No, the mob pulls down the statue. This is not the American way. This is not the America that I know. But speaking about politics, buddy, I know that you served in the state assembly. This is where you and I have something in common. I worked in the assembly under Paul DiGaetano when he was the majority leader. And I also worked for John
that was
Kelly.
after I had left by then, right?
Yeah, that was my first job out of college. But do you think the Democratic Party would welcome you now? I mean, I think clearly it's a different party. I mean, my family came from Italy. They worked in unions. They worked on the railroad. They worked in the trades. To be honest with you, I think of my uncles, my grandfather who served in the Marine Corps, worked in the Prudential building. Those men had nothing to do with the platform of this particular party. Do you think that they would welcome you?
No, I don't. But I was a Democrat with a conservative philosophy. And how I became a Democrat may be of interest to you, Joe. I was with my wife. We were just married, and I attended an event with my father-in-law and mother-in-law, dinners someplace, I forget. And at the dinner were the representatives, the legislative representatives from my district. And I turned to my wife, Marion, and I said, these are the people who represent me? They can hardly speak. I mean, I can't believe that these people represent a couple of 100,000 people in my district. So what I did was I went to the Republican chairman at the time in the county, and because my entire family was Republicans. And he said I was too young I think at that time I was 27, 28 years old, something like that. And so he said, you've got to become a member of the Young Republicans and then work your way up. So I mentioned it to my father-in-law, and he said, let me introduce you to the Democratic chairman. And I sat with him and spoke with him for a while, and he said to me, okay, we'll put you on the ticket. You'll run against these incumbents who are Republicans. And little did I know at the time that I was a sacrificial lamb in everybody's eyes. But to make a long story short, we were very fortunate to win, and we won. And we were able to make a contribution in the time that I was there. So to answer your question, no, I'm not sure that they would welcome me. And right now, I don't welcome them either.
I love it.
But also, buddy, as a conservative American and also as a Roman Catholic, I'd be interested in your views of our current president, Donald Trump. I mean, clearly he's not a saint, but I'd be interested in your views. I mean, I could speak personally. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I will vote for Donald Trump again. The primary reason why I will vote for Donald Trump is for judges. Judges. I am interested in constitutionalists to be put on the court, particularly the Supreme Court. I am not interested in activists to be put on any court. Sadly, if you say you're voting for Donald Trump, you listen to voices, particularly in Hollywood, Rob Reiner coming to mind, you're immediately labeled as a racist. You can't have a conversation. You can't put forth any type of reason from an intellectual perspective as far as why. And in fact, many people just think you're stupid. And I think that's another insult. And I'd be interested in your perspective as an American, as a conservative man, as a father, as a husband, and frankly, as a Roman Catholic.
It's funny you mentioned Rob Reiner, because the first thing that comes to mind is the character he played on Archie Bunker was more intelligent than the one he is in real life. I know Donald Trump from my days in the legislature. One of the committees I chaired oversaw the development of Atlantic City, the casino industry. So I got to meet him, to deal with him, and even socialize with him. Not with our wives, that kind of socializing, but attending events. He would invite me to various functions that his company was holding, and it was that kind of thing. But I voted for Donald Trump. I think the country, if they elect anybody but Donald Trump right now, the United States of America is no longer the United States that we grew up with. Right now, it's at that crossroads, and I just can't imagine anybody with half a brain not voting for. Well, let me turn that around. With half a brain voting for Joe Biden. I mean, he has no idea what's going on. I mean, it's ridiculous. How is he going to lead the number one country in the world? I can't imagine that taking place. As from a religious standpoint, I was inducted into the Knights of Malta. I consider myself a fairly religious guy. So religion is important to me. But you said something that is really and should be the centerpiece of political arguments, and that is adherence to the United States Constitution. You can't say, well, I want conservative judges, because then you open an argument to those people who say, well, I want liberal judges. They have every right to do that. I just want judges that understand and adhere to the original intent of the Constitution. It has served us well up to this point, and to fool around, screw around with it is a major mistake, a major mistake.
And we've seen the fruit of that, buddy. Obviously, at least since the 1960s, as long as Joe and I have been alive. Again, I think I agree with you that we don't want to say liberal judge, conservative judge, but to be someone who adheres to the text of the Constitution as it's written, that would be considered conservative. I did want to ask you this, buddy, because I think it's important to try to realize where we are and where we've come from. You mentioned to me that one of the main problems today is that the youth in America basically take America for granted. Now, Joe and I happen to agree with you on that completely. Please explain for us and for our audience why that is. And if you don't mind, buddy, give us your thoughts on how this current generation views the idea of sacrifice compared to, let's say, your generation or even Joe and my generation.
The Italian Tribune, for years, and it started with my father-in-law, on Memorial Day, we dedicate that issue to those readers who have served. And by that I mean we invite them to send us photographs and little tidbits of information as to where they were stationed and what took place and whatever they want to talk about. But it's dedicated to our readers who served in the armed forces. It is the most popular issue that we print. It is the thickest issue that we print, and people look forward to it every year. So the Italian Tribune believes in service. And I think I said recently that one night I was watching television and I saw a commercial for wounded warriors. And you can't help but think about sacrifice and how those guys have, sacrificed a limb, 2 limbs, their lives for people to rip down statues and burn neighborhoods. I mean, doesn't anybody ask that question? Don't any of our leaders stand up and oppose the abuse that people have exercised with the United States of America? This is a country to be proud of. It's a country that guys gave their lives for, not just recently. They've been doing it for years. They fought a civil war. The greatest loss of life in the history of the United States of America in any war, and you guys know this, took place in the Civil War. And they fought to rid the country of slavery. And yet you've got the people on the left who have no argument with Donald Trump, so they call him a racist. They've had no argument with the success of the economy, so they say that's racist bent, and everything that goes on in the country is racist. They talk about the Supreme Court being racist. Well, give me a break.
Well, everybody's racist, you know?
Yeah, and it's two ignorant people throw that card. I hate when people use that, one guy, I think I mentioned to Joe, one of our readers sent me a letter and called me a racist. I'm a racist, so I sent him a letter back. I said, "Did you ever sponsor a minority, a black person into your club? Did you ever baptize a black baby?" Silence. Mm-hmm. Silence. Never heard from him again. And it's just that we're dealing today with people who don't appreciate the efforts of others. They don't understand what it takes to have a republic like the United States of America. I mean, if I remember my history correctly, Benjamin Franklin said, this is going to be a great place if we can maintain the republic.
Yeah.
And, we're at that crossroads today.
Well, that's a problem too, buddy, is like you said, you're having problems when you say to someone, I want to talk to you about this. I have a different point of view. I want to debate you. I want to have a conversation. That's what the left says all the time. Can't we have dialogue? Can't we have conversation? Can't we talk about this? In the meantime, we say, okay, let's talk about this. You say, no, we don't want to talk about it. Let's say, in reference to, just use this as an example, tearing down a statue of Christopher Columbus. They say, no, he was a racist. That's it. You say, well, wait, I want to talk about it. No, and if you want to talk about it, you are a racist. You don't even have to say anything other than, I want to have a debate with you on
exactly.
this. And that's what makes you a racist. In other words, that's my problem with somebody like the mayor of West Orange, Parisi. You think in your mind, okay, I know in Newark things are a little crazier, but in West Orange, you're not going to have a conversation. You know what I mean? And then you're just dismissed as, no, Columbus is racist, and if you support or if you honor his legacy in any way or his achievements, then you're a racist too. So, Joe Resinello, what else did you have there?
You're right. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, I just, to put a finer point on the conversation, I'm old school, buddy. And I always say, you tell a tree by the fruit it bears. We're looking at the policies of the left. We're seeing the fruit that it bears. We're seeing economic malfeasance. We're seeing the defunding of police, which is breeding crime. We're seeing the burning of poor communities who, after this election, will belong in the annals of history. Those poor people will suffer. This is what we're seeing. Again, you tell a tree by the fruit it bears. People have to take off their political hat and look at issues. They have to be objective. And this is something that Joe Pasillo and myself always do. We appeal to people of goodwill, all people, Black people, white people, Hispanic people, Italian people, all people of goodwill who love this country, who have benefited from this country. There is no country on the face of the earth that could have produced two people like myself and Joe Pasillo. Joe Pasillo's father was a Teamster. My father ran a barbershop, a one-man barbershop in Belleville. He owned a house and sent his children to college. That goes on nowhere outside of America. And it's about time that people should be thankful. And it starts in the home, it starts in the kitchen, and it starts with good men standing up and speaking the truth clearly. And Buddy Fortunato, you are one of those men. We thank you. We thank you for the voice of the Italian Tribune, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
And Buddy, where can people go to subscribe to the Italian Tribune?
They can either check our website out or give us a call at our office in West Orange, and our circulation department will make arrangements for them to get the paper. It's a weekly publication and by far the largest Italian American publication in the country. Very shortly, we will have an online presence that we're pretty excited about, because it's going to be different. It's going to be moving content online. So it'll be the Italian Tribune, but with moving content and various compartments that of interest to people, whether it be fashion or food or wine or whatever. But that should be pretty interesting, and that's under construction right now.
All right, good. And so thank you for that. And Buddy Fortunato, we want to thank you again for appearing on the front line with Joe and Joe. And by the way, Buddy, Joe and I, our audience is growing. Thank the Lord. And we're getting a message out there of resistance, and not just resistance, but going on offense in this culture war that we're in. This platform belongs to you, buddy. Anytime you want to come on and have a conversation, talk about a particular thing that's going on, you're more than welcome on this show, my friend.
Well, that's very kind of you, and I too extend that to you guys. Anything you ever want to see in the paper or want to comment on, just give me a call.
Absolutely.
And again, thank you for thinking of the paper.
Absolutely. And thank you again, buddy, for clarifying the Christopher Columbus situation. There was a lot of speculation going around. I did a video that got over 250,000 views that was seen by obviously a whole bunch of people. So you just set the record straight on everything, buddy, and we thank you for it, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future. And remember, all you good people out there, not only go to the Italian Tribune website, go and subscribe to this wonderful newspaper. Follow also Joe and Joe and I both on Facebook and on YouTube at The Frontline with Joe and Joe. Like, subscribe, share, hit the little bell, do all that fun stuff. And remember that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation, it's going on everywhere. We'll see you next time.